Welcome to the Prattaugan Museum and Visitor Center, located in the heart of downtown Prattville. You've scanned the QR code for the complete museum tour. The tour lasts approximately 40 minutes and incorporates something from each display in the museum, along with information on this, the McWilliam Smith Rice House, and its exterior grounds. Should you prefer not to take a complete tour, you will find QR codes throughout the museum on various display cases. Feel free to choose which items you are interested in learning about. If at any time you would like more information on something you see, pause your device and ask one of our qualified museum docents. They'll be happy to help you. Now, let's take a tour. As you walk into the front hall of the museum, you will notice two display cases, one across from the stairs and one to the right of the front door. This area of the museum changes every couple of months with new displays on various topics relating to Prattville and Autauga County. One thing that stays the same, however, is the grouping of paintings and photographs near the stairs. Notice Mr. McWilliams, who built this house in 1848. The house is over a century and a half years old. Mr. McWilliams wanted to live out in the country. Out in the country was just a few blocks up the street, so he swapped homes with his good friend Amos Smith, the gentleman in the center portrait. Mr. Smith has the distinction of naming this town Prattville. Related to the Smiths through marriage, the next picture is of the Rice children, brother and sister. In 1994, the Rice family donated this house to Autauga County Heritage Association on the condition that it would be used as a museum. An arrangement was made with the city of Prattville whereby they would own and maintain the property. The city appropriated $83,000 for renovations. Autauga County Heritage Association opened the Prattaugan Museum and Visitor Center to the public in April 1996. For 38 years, the association has been collecting, archiving, and disseminating Autauga County history to the public. Now, facing the front door, turn to your right, and you are entering the Pratt Room. Directly to the left as you enter the room, notice the picture on the wall of Daniel Pratt's family home in Temple, New Hampshire. Daniel Pratt was a 19th century entrepreneur who was born in Temple, New Hampshire. He went to school until he was 12 years of age. His mother died when he was 16 years old. After he left school, he became an apprentice architect. He left home at age 20, moving to Georgia, where he built beautiful antebellum homes. Those that are still standing are revered for their excellence in architecture. In Georgia, he met and married Esther Ticknor, who is seen in the framed picture below Pratt's childhood home with their daughter Ellen and servant Eliza Atwood. This is a picture of a painting done by artist and close friend of Pratt's, George Cook. In Georgia, Pratt met Samuel Griswold, who taught him how to build cotton gins. Within 1 year, Pratt was so proficient he became Griswold's partner. Eager to expand, Pratt decided to move out west where cotton was growing. Griswold decided not to come because of the Indian uprisings. Autauga County is named after the Autauga Indians that lived along the Alabama River at the mouth of the Autauga Creek. On the wall to the left of the door is a deed for the land of Prattville. Pratt bought 2,064 acres for $21,000 from Joseph May. At the time of his purchase, he had 2.5 years left on a 5-year lease at the McNeil Mill 3 miles down the creek towards Montgomery. Pratt was so successful by the time his lease was up, he had completely paid off his debt of Prattville. Going back to the right side of the doorway, notice a grouping of 4 pictures. Daniel Pratt is seen in his earlier years on the left, a middle-aged Pratt on top, and a photograph of his ward and nephew, Merrill Pratt, to the right. The last photo below contains 4 generations of Pratt, each generation having the name either Daniel or Merrill. The baby in the picture is now in his 80s and has 2 daughters. Of course, there are other Pratt descendants still in town today. One of them, whose name is Merrill, is a girl. Daniel and Esther had 3 daughters. Only one survived infancy, their daughter Ellen. An adult Ellen can be seen above the organ with another of Pratt's wards, Henry de Bartolabin. Henry and his mother lived in Pratt's home from the time Henry was 10 years old. His mother was a relative of Pratt's. Ellen and Henry are seen here together because in 1862, during the war between the states, Pratt brought Henry home from the war to work in the mill. Soon after, Ellen and Henry were married in the Methodist Church in LaGrange, Georgia. After the war, Henry and Ellen moved to Birmingham, where Henry developed steel for Pratt. The advancement of Pratt City, Birmingham, and Bessemer is largely due to Pratt developing steel there. Ellen and Henry de Bartoleben are known as the first family of Bessemer. They had 9 children, and Henry named the Alice furnace, which he developed, after one of his daughters. The photo below, Henry and Ellen, are pictures of an older Daniel and Esther Pratt. The pictures are photos of paintings by artist George Cook. Merrill Pratt stayed in Prattville, where he and his descendants continued to build the Pratt legacy in Autauga County. And it is for that reason much of the history in the Prattaugan Museum is in regard to his family. In the case on the right side of the doorway, notice a ledger from the town of Washington. The town of Washington was where International Paper is today, and was also the first county seat of Autauga County. Next to the ledger is a bound newspaper, the Autauga Citizen, started by Daniel Pratt. Look closely in the upper right-hand corner, as Pratt signed off on every copy. In the case directly across from the organ, there are photos of the Autauga Bank and Trust. If you drive to the end of Main Street and round the corner, the fountain is on your left and the Bank and Trust, or Roy Building, is on your right. The opening to the bank vault was on the 2nd floor, but the vault itself is a 2-story vault with a brick building built around it. Pratt's mercantile for the gin shop workers was downstairs. The token to the right is good for 1 cent of merchandise. Pratt was very paternal to all those who around him, and every gin shop worker got a house and a garden. It was his goal, not just to build his own wealth, but to build a town for the people. Believed to be Alabama's first millionaire, within 10 years of coming to the area, he asked his wife if she wanted to get out of this wilderness land and return to the north. Prattville had been a swamp that Daniel Pratt filled in with dirt to build the town, and they had 2 children die here. Esther said no. They needed to stay and build houses and churches and schools for the people, and that's exactly what they did. Notice the organ behind you. It is an 1890s organ built in Canada and donated by the Windham family of Prattville. Had you visited Pratt's house, surely you would have listened to music, perhaps on an organ like this, as he loved music. Pratt was passionate about the arts. When expanding his gin manufacturing business to New Orleans, Pratt met artist George Cook and built him a studio there. Pratt also built a gallery next to his home and hung many of Cook's paintings there. The photo on the organ is a picture of a painting by George Cook of the interior of St. Peter in Rome. Pratt commissioned Cook to paint a large-scale version, 15 feet by 25 feet. It is the largest framed oil painting in the world. When Pratt's gallery came down due to dry rot, the painting was donated to the University of Georgia in Athens. It hangs there today in the university's chapel. When George Cook died in 1849, his wife brought his body back to Prattville to be buried, as Pratt had been so supportive of her husband. Look above the door and you can see a painting of the Pratt family cemetery where Pratt buried his friend. The watercolor, along with several others throughout the museum, was painted by Margaretta Barnes and donated to the museum by Robert E. Lee, who commissioned Ms. Barnes to paint several images of Autauga County that are displayed throughout the museum. As you walk around the room, you will notice a couch in front of the fireplace. It belonged to Pratt's granddaughter and Marilyn Julia Pratt's daughter, Dora Pratt Barnes. Dora had donated it to the Methodist Church, who gifted it to the museum. Pratt was a good Methodist, but even if you were Baptist, Presbyterian, or Episcopalian, Pratt would build you a church. He believed if you went to church, you'd be a great worker, and you didn't have to go to his church. He was very progressive for his day. As you continue walking around the room, notice the case to the right of the window. In it is Dora's china. Girls of the day would buy china and paint it themselves. Can you see the stippling on the coffee pot? The calling card, as they're called, are a little smaller than business cards today. If you visited a friend, you would leave a card. Without phones and emails, you might have several visitors in one day. At the end of the day, you could look back at the calling cards you received and write a note. Thank you for your visit. It was so nice to see you today. Above the case are 3 aerial views of the gin shop. Powered by water like factories in the north, Water above the dam would go under the buildings, power a 60 horsepower wheel, and later a 90 horsepower turbine. Water would then flow out of another building below the dam and down the creek. The factory had belts from its power source, going from floor to ceiling, along with an elaborate belt system attached to the ceilings, taking various parts and supplies from one side of the factory to the other on each level. In the tall case to the right are various items from the Pratt mansion. The mansion was torn down in 1961 and was the impetus of the Autauga County Heritage Association starting its preservation group. The house sat empty for 15 years. The owners of the company at the time lived in Belgium, and the land was more valuable to them for parking and offices. The case to the right has Pratt children's clothing, or underwear. One child who had toured the museum wrote a previous director thanking her for showing him her underwear. The clothing is all buttons and bows. Do you know what had not been invented yet? That's right, elastic. The photo above the case on the left is Dora Pratt in her beautiful satin wedding dress she wore on the day she wed Mr. Barnes. The house in the center was the Barnes Mansion, built by Dora's mother. Merrill and Julia Pratt had 3 daughters, and 3 beautiful homes were built for each of them. The Barnes Mansion stood across the creek next to the gin shop where the Masonic Lodge stands today. The house burned down in a fire. Above the house is a picture of Julia Adelaide Allen Smith, wife of Dr. Samuel Parrish Smith, who were the parents of Merrill Pratt's wife. In the picture to the right of the house is Dora's granddaughter, Jewel Barnes Smith, wearing her grandmother Dora's wedding dress at age 15. Jewel Barnes Smith died in April 2011. So you see, we are not that far from our history here in Prattville. On this side of the room, in the case in the center of the room, notice the photo on the left. Look closely. Can you see the letters that spell out Pratt Gin Company? A building was built extending out like a T from that one, and lettering was taken down. The wooden R you see in the center of the case is from the building in the photo. To the right of that is an original Pratt Company letterhead, and Merrill Pratt's II's letter opener. As we leave the Pratt room, notice on the door an original Pratt Gin Company advertisement. No commercials or websites. These ads were sent all over, as Pratt had the largest gin manufacturing company in the world up until the 2000s, selling to Russia, Cuba, and many other countries. Prattville is believed to be the birthplace of industry in what was an all-agricultural South. Daniel Pratt provided jobs to men and women, blacks and whites. Pratt did have slaves to his father's condemnation. He wrote his father and said, "Better a slave for him than for someone else. He only sought to improve their lives." Pratt paid his slaves wages, allowed them to read and learn, and his own personal slave, Charles Atwood, who is, in all Pratt's letters, written of as a family member, was freed at the start of the Civil War and became a part owner in Pratt's railroad interests. When Pratt's daughter and son-in-law, Ellen and Henry DeBartoleben, moved to Birmingham, Charles bought their house for $700 and lived in an affluent white neighborhood. Now, let's walk across the hall to the Dragoon Room. A dragoon is a heavily armed cavalry soldier. In 1861, when the war between the states broke out, the important men of the town met here in this west front parlor. The house has never been moved, so you're standing in a place of history, where men such as Daniel Pratt, Merrill Pratt, Smith, and others stood to determine how their town would enter into the war effort. Pratt was against the war, saying that the South would never survive without the industrial North. However, once the South seceded and the war was inevitable, Pratt wholeheartedly supported his town and Confederacy with $250,000 in war bonds, uniforms, and horses. A war bond can be seen on the wall to your left, just right of the entryway into the next room. Soon after the meeting here, a dinner was held on the 3rd floor of the gin shop for a little over 70 of the young men of the town who were encouraged to sign up. Next to the fireplace, notice a Union saddle with a Confederate blanket. As you view the case to the right of the fireplace, notice several Confederate items, original and reproductions. The uniform is a cadet uniform. There is not a Prattville Dragoon uniform in existence today, as the men were buried in them or they were destroyed after years of war. The uniforms were black with gold braiding and said to be so ornate that even the enlisted men were saluted. The case contained such items as a cannonball, mini balls, hardtack, a trooper's handbook, canteen, and more. In the case to the left of the fireplace, there is a Remington pistol and a Company K book. Like the Dragoons, Company K was an Autauga County unit. The book was written after the war. There are 25 original Company K books, and this is one of them. Look to the bottom right, and you'll see a tool to make a mini ball. Pour your metal in, let it cool, and you're ready to go. Notice the flag in the case. The girls from the first school in Prattville, the Pratt Male and Female Academy, made a beautiful silk flag for the soldiers. No one knows what it looked like, but the Sons of Confederate Veterans made us this one based off unit flags of the day. A nice young girl named Abby Holt made a little speech and handed the soldiers the flag, out where the Prattville Primary School is today. 2 monuments mark the spot from where they rode out of town and off to war. On the wall to the left of the doorway that goes into the Autauga room is sheet music for the Prattville Light Dragoons March, which can be heard on the Sons of Confederate Veterans website. We like to say that George L. Smith, who lived in this house at the time, must have remembered that nice young girl who made a little speech and handed the soldiers the flag, because when he came back from the war, he married her and she became Abby Holt Smith and lived in this house. Her portrait hangs above the fireplace. Holt was a relative of Daniel Pratt's sister. Many of Pratt's family and friends, Northerners, came south to help Pratt build his community. Now, Abby Holt and George L. Smith had boys who were making quite a ruckus upstairs, and Abby said, "Boys and dogs belong outside." So Mr. Smith built a little house next door, and the boys were only allowed in the main house for meals. If you turn to the door from which you entered, you'll notice a piano which was donated to the museum by the Robinson sisters. On top of the piano are pictures of their grandfather, Mr. Goodson, who was an African-American soldier from Prattville in World War I. When Mr. Goodson returned from the war, he was blessed with a daughter, Juanetta Goodson Robinson. Mrs. Robinson went to college and is believed to be the first African-American woman to own and operate her own business in Prattville in 1964, 100 years after the Civil War. She owned Goodson's Beauty Shop. It was said of her business that it was a place where patrons felt like they were coming to visit a friend, a place where life stories were shared. Left of the piano is a World War II display. Up to this point, women had worked in the cotton factory making textiles, but during the war, the first 70 women began working in the gin shop, making bomb casings for fragment and chemical bombs, gun mounts for naval ships, and spinners. Notice the picture of the gin shop identification button in the center of the case. The bombs in the display were found in the basement of the gin shop in a hole in the wall. The women were so proficient in their task, they won the E for Excellence Award from the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance. The ceremony was held in Birmingham, where the Pratt Gin Company corporate offices were at the time. As all production was top secret, the photos in the display were taken by the government for their records. The ceremony took place a month before Pearl Harbor. At the time, 4,000 people lived in Prattville. 300 of them worked at the gin shop, and 90% of all gin shop production was turned into the war effort. Yet until the awards ceremony, no one outside the gin shop knew what they were doing. Look to the right side of the case. Do you see the war ration books? Coming out of the Great Depression and going into World War II, these coupon-like books were issued for items such as sugar and shoelaces. The country was economically strapped, as much of our surplus went towards the war effort. Yet in a very depressed economy, the government came to Prattville and spent $500,000 on flood control, approximately $8.5 million today. Prattville downtown flooded in 1919, 1938, and 1939. Flood control consisted of the cement walls and flooring in the creek below the dam, along with the levees on the opposite side of the creek. How did we get them to spend so much money in a depressed economy? The Western Union telegrams on the left of the case are from Merrill Pratt II to Senator Hobbs saying, basically, if you don't build us our levees, We can't build you your bombs. Taking our eyes off of the war, as you turn around you'll see a case of beautiful dresses. The lavender dress is a 1930s wedding dress. The photo to the bottom right shows young Miss Doster and Mr. Walthall on their wedding day. The flowers cascade down the back of her dress as well. On a hot Alabama day in the 1930s, with no air conditioning, she's not only beautiful, but fragrant. The child's dress to the far left was pulled from the rubble of the house called Prattaugan, seen in the photo below. The house was a wood frame house made to look like stone, and was one of the 3 houses built for Merrill Pratt's daughters. The house was located in what was called the Deer Park on the other side of the creek. As you cross the Bridge Street Bridge and go left, you can see stone pillars still standing today. That was the entrance to the Deer Park, and they had 2 live bears chained to the front gate. The dresses on the right belong to the daughters of Mayor Burns, the first mayor in the general elections of Prattville. The girls had private wedding ceremonies, and the next day large receptions. These are the dresses they wore to their reception, and are appropriately called their second day dresses. To the right of the dress case, on a chair, there is a smaller case with a dress remnant. On the fabric there are 4 round buttons. Can you guess what they're made of? Wood? Metal? That would be wrong. They're actually human hair buttons. Girls of the day would brush their hair and set it aside and repurpose it into all sorts of arts and crafts. Now, walk through to the next room. As we leave the Dragoon room, you are entering the Autauga room. Directly to your right, on the door, there is a photo of Mrs. Rawlinson at age 95 in the 1950s, spinning on her spinning wheel in a still very rural Autauga County. Above the door is another Margaretta Barnes watercolor. This one is of the Rawlinson grist mill. A grist mill would normally be the first mill built in a community to grind grains. The foot, or flax wheel, sitting atop the sewing machine was used by women to spin a pale hair-like fiber of the flax plant into linen thread. The sewing machine is a 1919 second-generation Singer. The quilt behind it is a drunken sailor pattern with its non-traditional line. Above the quilt is another Margaretta Barnes watercolor. This one is of the cotton mill, or Gurney building, where they made textiles. The Gurney buildings were much larger than the gin shop, and it was said that coming into Prattville in the 1800s, they must have looked like skyscrapers. The Gurney buildings burnt down in 2002 due to arson. Turning to the center of the room, you can't miss the Pratt gin. Donated by the Crenshaw family in 2010, they said it had been on the second floor of their barn for 100 years. That's where a single family gin would go. Pratt sold 1,500 a year. This was the technology of the day. A farmer could purchase a gin and put it upstairs in their barn with a belt going down to the mules. Can you see the burn marks in the wood angled down? There is a large wheel on the opposite side. It turns the 45 saws along the front in a counterclockwise direction at about 500 to 600 RPMs. In the box of the machine is a pig hair brush barrel. The smaller wheel could turn the barrel about 17 to 1800 RPMs in a clockwise direction. This would create suction in the center of the machine. As you put your cotton in the opening on top, suction would pull it back as the seeds would fall directly below and seeded cotton would literally blow out the back. There are 45 saws across the front of this gin. Pratt built a Eureka gin that had 80 saws. A gin was sold by the saw, $3, $4, or $6 saws, times the number of saws, and that was the price of your gin. What gave Pratt the quality control was instead of using wrought iron like a blacksmith, Pratt poured cast iron into intricate molds, such as the one in the case under the window. On the wall to the right of the door that faces the hallway, you can see an original Pratt gin blueprints, a picture of Pratt taken for DuBose magazine, and a certificate from the Central Agricultural and Mechanical Association presented to Daniel Pratt November 1872 at the annual fair in Selma for the best cottonseed linter. Over the doorway is a watercolor of McQueen Smith Farms, painted by Margaretta Barnes. For many years, McQueen Smith Farms was the largest privately owned farm in the state of Alabama, with 10,000 acres. The house is still standing today on McQueen Smith Road. On the left side of the doorway that leads to the hall is a Loomis Lab Gin from New York. In the case to the left are some items made from cotton, along with a description of cotton middling grades. Cotton was picked in 3 stages. The first picking was the cleanest. The last picking, where you would pull and crush the boll, was called bolling the cotton. There would be more trash in it to clean out with the carding tools, seen in the right side of the case. This would make for a lesser grade of cotton. A typical Southern reply to, "How are you doing today?" might be, "Fair to middling." This response was derived from the various grades of cotton. Directly beneath the middling grade case is an early American roller gin. Predating Eli Whitney's patented saw gin, roller gins are still in use today for Egyptian cotton, which has a longer stalk and is too delicate to saw. The machines today, however, are not as primitive looking as this one. The pictures above are watercolors by Margaretta Barnes of the Buena Vista Mansion and the Prattville Train Depot. The Buena Vista is believed to have been designed by builder-architect Daniel Pratt for the Montgomery family in the 1840s. The train depot to the left is still standing, although empty. Over the fireplace is the new courthouse, which was built in 1906. The old courthouse is still standing on Court Street and was built in 1870. Now, enter the small room to the back right side of the Yatagha room. Entering the medical room, notice the dental chair to your left. It's from Dr. Jones's dental office, which was in the Moncrief building. This building is still standing on Court Street and is the residence of the Pasta Mill restaurant and Paravicini's furniture store. On the wall to the right of the door, there is a picture of the building. The stairs that went up the side are no longer there, and the windows have been bricked in. The second floor of the building has ceilings as high as those in the Yatagha room you just came from. The light directly above you is one of several that hung on the second floor of the Moncrief building, down a long hallway with plaster walls, beautiful moldings and doors, each with a transom above. On one side you might see Dr. Jones's dental office, the other the beauty shop, and so on. It was an 1800s indoor mall. The picture of the dental office's colored entrance speaks of a very different time than Pratt's. Most doors such as this have all been destroyed. This is one of the few left in existence that reminds us of our history. The African-American poet George Santana said, "Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it." J.E. Wilkinson went to the University of the South in Tennessee and became a doctor. Upon returning to Prattville, he owned and operated our first pharmacy. The apothecary bottle is labeled "Poison" by J.E. Wilkinson, the druggist. The wheelchair also came out of his office, and we can't leave out the medical room without pointing out the assorted pill bottle. The picture above the back window is of the Washington Ferry. The town of Washington was where International Paper is today and was Yatagha County's first county seat. Pratt would wagon his gins from his factory down the Old Plank Road to the Washington Ferry, where they would cross the Alabama River to Montgomery and be placed on steamboats for delivery. At the time, the ferry was the only access across the Alabama River to Montgomery, and Daniel Pratt owned it. As you turn to leave the medical room, notice the photos to the right of the window. The last left you can make on Prattville's Main Street is over the Bridge Street Bridge, also known as the Cigarette Bridge, because a 2-cent tax was placed on every pack of cigarettes to build it. The bridge was long since paid for, yet we're told the tax stands. The day the bridge opened, December 24, 1947, several council members and Judge Thomas posed for a photo standing on the bridge holding a cigarette. One of the first people to drive across the bridge was Mrs. Lucille Thomas. At the time, she was one of 3 women to own and operate a business on Main Street. Now, let's leave the medical room and walk through the Yatagha room to the hallway. As we turn right, you will pass a spinning wheel on your right. It was donated by Judy Godwin. The spinning wheel belonged to her husband, who was the mayor of Billingsley. Walking through what was once the back door of the house, We enter the now enclosed back porch. Entering the back porch and looking to the right side of the guest facilities, we see a picture of Pratt's mansion. Notice the fountain in the front and the brick pillars with cast iron fence around the perimeter of the estate. They certainly display Pratt's extreme wealth. Below the photo is a piece of the cast iron fence from his home. To the left of the guest facilities door is a picture of the Pratt family cemetery. It sits high atop Gin Shop Hill and overlooks the town. The museum has brochures with directions to the cemetery and a census of its residents. Below is an original cast iron fence piece from the cemetery. It's in the lamb and willow motif. The cemetery was restored in 1996 by the Autauga County Heritage Association. To the right of the exterior door is a picture of George Grant, a 1927 Cleveland Indians baseball player. Upon his retirement, Grant returned to Prattville and was elected county sheriff. He lived in the red brick house with his wife and children. However, it was not just his home, but the county jail. And not just the jail, but the gallows. His wife had the task of feeding the prisoners in the tower by sending food up a dumbwaiter. We're told that only one person ever escaped from the jail, and that they did so through the dumbwaiter. However, this might be an urban legend. To the left of the exterior door are photos of Ernie Doc Wingard, who was Prattville's first professional baseball player. He is seen here in photos with his teammate Casey Stengel, who later became a well-known and beloved manager of the New York Yankees and New York Mets for many years. Below the photos are Autauga County Indian artifacts donated by Bob Lee, Billy Bolger, Tony Bolger, and Ruth Watkins. They say at one time there were so many American Indian settlements along the Alabama River that you can almost run your hands anywhere through the mud and come up with some sort of American Indian artifact. Now, walk through the entryway to your left to the next room. As we walk into the Mims room with several pioneer artifacts, be sure and ask your children what the object is on the small dresser between the window and the backside door. Do you see it? They might say typewriter. Actually, it's a cash register. Most children 8 and under usually don't know. To the left is a butter churn. As technology advanced, notice the swing churn donated by the Northington family. It gave Mom a little more time. She could give it a swing and continue working on other projects. Atop the case to the left is another technological advancement, as the housewife who owned the hand beater daisy churn probably thought she had a high-tech, modern kitchen. Above the case is a watercolor by Margaretta Barnes of the Mims Hotel. Part of the hotel has been moved to Old Pratt Village on 1st Street, just behind the museum. We have brochures for a walking tour that takes you by some of the oldest homes in Autauga County, like the 1835 Slayton House. Below the paintings are photos of Shadrach Mims and his wife. Shadrach was an early settler and known for writing the first biography on Autauga County, which is sold here at the museum's gift shop directly across from where you're standing now. The room you are now standing in was originally not here. The kitchen was on one side, detached from the house. Food was brought outside the kitchen and up into the dining room, which is now our archives, and food warmers like the one on the floor next to the cash register. That way, if the kitchen caught on fire, the rest of the house would be safe. The Autauga County Heritage Association has been collecting, archiving, and sharing history with the community for 38 years. Our acquired knowledge and resources are available to the public. We invite you to spend some time in the archives, learning about Autauga County history, looking at photos, or researching your own genealogy. Now, let's go back to the enclosed back porch and out the back door to learn a little bit about the museum's surrounding grounds. Out the back door and down the ramp, you'll see a grapevine growing to the back right. Daniel Pratt was considered a fine Methodist and did drink wine. He said, however, that forever and all times there should be no alcohol in Prattville. He said that uneducated people didn't need to drink because they wouldn't work. Pratt lived on the other side of the creek. Being good at all he put his hands to, Daniel Pratt crossed a muscadine, a wild grape of the South that thrives in our hot and humid Alabama weather, with a French grape. This vine was propagated from Pratt's own vineyard and has been DNA tested. So come October, the museum sells the only Pratt grape jelly in the world. You might want to come back and purchase some. To the left of the ramp, behind the house, is an artesian well. There was once over 400 wells in the county. There are now only 8 in the city of Prattville. This is clean, free water to the community. You may see someone filling up a jug. The museum has water bottles for sale. You should get one. Beyond the well is the Little House. Once used for the Smith boys, it's now an extended archives for the association. Volunteers meet here every Thursday to catalog and archive Watauga County history. If you are interested in serving through preservation, we are always in need of volunteers. If you can't serve, we understand. You can still help by becoming an Watauga County Heritage member and supporting the ongoing preservation for generations to come. We believe that preserving our history preserves our future and the future of our community's economy. Thank you for touring the Prattaugan Museum. Feel free to pick up brochures on other fun and informative points of interest in Watauga County. Have a nice day!